Laura, when we think about the note that we heard yesterday at the close of court, unpersuadable opinions on this RICO charge, and now coming into court, just 1 hour of deliberations, and the jury has come to a consensus. So they went home, maybe cooler heads prevailed. They get up, they have clarity, and they're unanimous now. That's what this indicates, that there's a verdict. This is certainly something that is the highest level of stress for both the defense, anxiety-ridden for the prosecution. I think this reads probably more negatively from the defense perspective. So I imagine the angst of just hearing what this verdict is.
And it's why you have to be so careful with what you instruct the jury. When they say they can't reach a verdict, talk about how the judge has to be so careful with his language when he doesn't want to put too much pressure on him, but he does say your objective here is to reach consensus.
Absolutely. So when there's a deadlock, there is language that a judge can read. It's called an Allen charge. This judge actually fell short of that. It was a modified version. And it's specific, Laura, because it tells the jury to go into the deliberation room, listen to each other, think about the evidence. If you're in the minority of the group, hear out the other jurors who are in the majority, but don't put your personal convictions aside. It's towing the line of what we would call agreeing and doing your civic duty and coming to that consensus as a jury, but also not being pressured. And that's where it can get very dicey. There's a lot of criticism of this instruction. You hear the defense often say it's too early to give this instruction because
the defense wants a mistrial. The defense
Yes.
says their best hope is not, obviously acquittal would be great for the defense, but they're saying if you can't get an acquittal, we'll at least take a mistrial.
A mistrial is a win for the defense.
I'm going to interrupt you just closely here, Misty, because we are getting the verdict coming in right now. This is coming in real time, and we have count 1 here. This is the racketeering charge. We have the count here of not guilty on racketeering. This is coming in real time. We have count 2 also coming in here, not guilty. That is the sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Count 3. We have guilty. Count 3 is guilty for the transportation of Cassie Ventura. That is guilty. Count 4. This is the sex trafficking. Guilty. Count 5. We have guilty. That is 5 counts. We have a mixed verdict here. Again, count 1 as it relates to racketeering, not guilty. Count 2 as it relates to sex trafficking, not guilty. Guilty. Count 4, not guilty. Count 5, guilty. Now, we should bring up here, Misty, all of these counts have a range of different sentences, a range of different evidentiary burdens, a range of different outcomes we could have had here. But it is a mixed verdict, if you will.
It's a mixed verdict, but it is a stunning victory for the defense. The Mann Act, these charges, these were the easiest for prosecutors to prove, the lowest hanging fruit, merely required showing that state lines were crossed for the purpose to engage in prostitution. We saw a lot of evidence on these charges, did not have that element, Laura, of force, fraud, or coercion. And this carries the lightest sentence of these charges. It is a maximum of 10 years. And keep in mind, when you're talking about maximums aren't the rule. They are the exception. They're for the most exceptional and severe cases. So now you're talking about a sentence that's potentially in the lower range with time served because he's been behind bars. The fact that these sex trafficking charges, specifically with respect to Cassie Ventura, means that the jury was convinced by the defense, at least with respect to reasonable doubt, that the commercial sex, i.e. the freak-offs, were not connected to some of this violence, that there was not that force, fraud, or coercion element. That is by far, from a penalty perspective, the most serious. It carried a 15-year minimum. So that is a huge distinction. This is the best case scenario, in my view, for the defense. A lot of us opined yesterday that when the jury asked for a readback of Cassie Ventura and Daniel Phillips, one of the escorts' testimony, that read perhaps negatively for the defense. The jury was digging in to see if there was that force, fraud, or coercion. Clearly, it went the other way.
And, it's interesting because the prosecutors had told them you don't have to find force, fraud, or, coercion on every single instance that he did this, right? You only have to find one. It doesn't have to be that this happened every time. But for the racketeering, you really did need to find a pattern of behavior. You needed to find a criminal enterprise that he engaged in with other people. Right? When people think of racketeering, they think of the mob. They think of running drugs. They think of running guns. Now, federal prosecutors have used a far more expansive view of racketeering, especially in recent years in SDNY, right? Because
Absolutely.
they want to bring in all of the worst evidence. They want to stretch back the material decades ago. And so you've talked about how it allows them to tell a full story. Well, it turns out doing that in this case did not fulfill what the prosecutors had hoped, because obviously they have now cleared him. They have acquitted him of that top charge of racketeering. They have acquitted him of the two other charges of using force and fraud, despite having that video, right, Misty? We talked about that video being so damning for him, where you see him on tape pulling Cassie Ventura by the hair. You see him stomping on her. The jury heard evidence that he actually paid money to a security guard to bury that video, paid him in a paper bag, and yet it wasn't enough.
It was not enough. So when it comes to the sex trafficking, yesterday, those questions that the jury asked for the readback with respect to the testimony aligned perfectly to what prosecutors in their closing argument said were three very obvious instances of sex trafficking, because they did not have to find that it was the hundreds of times that Cassie Ventura had testified that she engaged in these freak-offs. So prosecutors pointed to these three. That testimony aligned exactly to that, what the jury wanted to hear. So here's where the defense clearly broke that chain, because what needed to happen was that the jury believes that the commercial sex acts, so those freak-offs, that Cassie Ventura engaged in them because of that violence, because of the force that Combs was exerting, because of extortion about releasing these videos. But what the defense argued was there were lots of other reasons. There was jealousy in the relationship. Yes, there was violence, but it related to these personal romantic relationships that he had
As
with both
opposed to
Cassie
being
and
part
Jane.
of this masterminding of an enterprise.
And you know what's interesting, Laura? So now we know, we opined about why the jury was not on the same page when it came to RICO. We said, was it because they couldn't agree on a predicate crime, or was it because they just couldn't get there with respect to the idea of this criminal enterprise, which has been very amorphous during the course of this case from prosecutors, hasn't really defined what it is or its purpose. And the answer is, it's that. It's either they didn't believe there was a conspiracy or the enterprise existed. And I say that because the Mann Act, these two charges are predicates for RICO. So if they believed that there had been a criminal
that means they didn't satisfy that. Okay, I want to go to Chloe Malas, who's standing by outside of court right now. Chloe, obviously a very emotional scene playing out in court. We don't have cameras in the courtroom, but we do have a team fanned out all over that building that you're looking at right now. Bring us inside the courtroom, if you will, Chloe, about what is happening in there. What is the reaction as this is still playing out and the judge thanking the jury now?
Even though there are two guilty counts for the Mann Act, Laura, the transportation to engage in prostitution, this is a massive victory for Combs's 8-person defense team. Teddy Garagos, the daughter of celebrity attorney Mark Garagos, who is one of the lead attorneys for this criminal case of Combs, she's wiping tears. This is a massive moment because, like you said, sex trafficking had a mandatory 15-year minimum. I mean, the prosecutors, they painted Combs as somebody that was beating women, which they owned up to, but running a criminal enterprise, and that he sex trafficked two of his former girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and also Jane, who testified under a pseudonym. This is undoubtedly a massive blow to the prosecution, who brought 34 witnesses. They talked a lot about these co-conspirators that they say carried out this illegal activity on Combs's behalf. I mean, you have 6 of his children in there. His mother, Janice, who has been inside the courtroom every single day. Diddy is praying. He is doing a prayer show of his prayer hands to the jury right now. I mean, I sat there in that courtroom almost every single day, and I watched the faces of those jurors, and you could tell that there were several of them that were not buying what the prosecution was putting forth in their arguments. I saw some roll their eyes. I saw some some even fall asleep, some clearly not buying what the prosecution was saying in their closing arguments. On the other hand, during Mark Agnifalo's theatrical closing arguments, there was even laughter from some of the jurors. It was a very clear, Misty Maris and I have talked about this at length, that there was dissent when it came to the racketeering. And I think that it is incredibly powerful that this jury, some were unpersuadable, that overnight they were able, within just an hour, to come to a unanimous verdict on the racketeering conspiracy. I mean, again, Combs, who does not have a lengthy criminal record, this is somebody that Mann Act, it's a 10-year mandatory maximum. It's unlikely that he would get that full 10 years. So this is a man that could see a few years behind bars. Again, this is a very emotional day. We are expecting the attorneys to give a press conference. The prosecutors have said that they will be giving a written statement. They will not be speaking today. We also know that the family plans to address his children. They plan to address the public. And we do think that there could be a statement from Combs himself later today. But in a very emotional scene in the courtroom. And I just want to remind everyone that over the last 7 weeks, although there were 34 witnesses that took the stand, Combs's team not calling a single witness and resting their case in just 30 minutes. I want to describe the scene behind me now. You have what I like to call citizen journalists. These are live bloggers, Instagrammers, TikTokers, filming every single day, live streaming what's happening here. There is a massive crowd gathering. There's about 100 people here right now. Some people are wearing free puffy shirts. You've seen that over the last several weeks. And again, Laura, a stunning victory, if you can call it that. But it is, considering that he was facing up to life in prison, for Combs and his legal team this morning.
Yeah, no, there's no question that federal prosecutors are going to be massively disappointed with this verdict, even with those 2 guilty counts. Chloe, thank you. Stand by. I also want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, you have followed this one from the very beginning. I want to just update our viewers about what's going on inside court right now. His defense team, given the acquittals on some of these charges, Kristen, they're asking for him to be released because, remember, he's been behind bars. He was facing such serious crimes, even though he had pled not guilty and maintained his innocence. He was behind bars this whole time, right? He has been in a detention center for months now, and so they're asking for him to be released today, for him to be able to live in Miami at his home. They said, look, his plane has been sequestered. This is his first conviction. He should be released on appropriate conditions. Kristen, what are the chances he walks today?
I think there is a high likelihood that he walks today. Keep in mind what the jury found, right? The jury did not find him guilty of counts 2 and 4. So they really ripped out the threat element. They ripped out the violence element. They ripped out the violent parts of which is what the prosecution used as the main thing to keep him in bail. Remember back to when they were arguing bail multiple times because the defense asked for reconsideration. And some of the main things that they pointed to was how Diddy was violent, how Diddy kind of utilized his enterprise to enact all of these violence. Well, the jury has spoken. There was no criminal enterprise, or at least they did not find that Puff Daddy or Diddy gets sentenced. This is really important because what's going to happen is the prosecutors are going to present aggravating factors. The defense is going to present mitigating factors.
We should make that clear. That does not happen today. That happens in months from now.
Down there.
Yeah.
But the fact that sex trafficking is an acquittal, it's going to be really important because that idea of who's exploited in these Mann Act charges, that Cassie Ventura or Jane were potentially exploited, that would be the prosecution's argument. I think you're going to lose a lot of that argument. So the judge is going to be looking at that possible penalty and likely saying that he will be released with those conditions. And one more point on that sex trafficking. I think the defense made a very good point, which the prosecution really had to concede. And when we say